Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
I'm joined by Tim and Denise Harlow, and normally when you've got somebody on that's got a book, it's like, well, we're going to talk about the book, but I've known you for so long.
Who would write a book on parenting?
maybe somebody out there. I've known you for so long that I just saw your kids do great in life, and as I was looking through, like, well, how do we talk about parenting in a way that's like really practical? Because a lot of times, a lot of those books wind up being like, you know, analogies and things. You're like, well, what do I do with this? So if I can set up your story. So you guys are coming into Chicago in your late 20s, I believe, right? And you
mid-20s for her.
Mid-20s.
Later 20s for me.
Yes.
You have you got a 2-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And
she had an accident in the nursery. We were potty training, so she had an accident in the nursery on our visiting weekend.
Oh my gosh.
That's the history. That's the one who has 2 kids now. Yeah.
Okay, so you come in and you basically take over a church that, you know, I guess knowing what I know in life, I would have been like, I don't know if this thing's going to work, dude. And for 8 years, you just really try to live out the gospel in a church that's not doing real well, maybe not dying, you know, and on the verge of, you know, quote unquote, going bankrupt week to week, but you get 8 really hard years, and in that you have 2 more kids, and now we can fast forward to say that, you know, to go from the church of a little room full of people to, you know, tens of thousands of people calling Parkview Christian Church home, and your kids. You know, I came into your life about 14 years ago because of radio. So I saw one of them go from about 6th grade into adulthood. I saw one of them go, you know, closer to high school and adulthood. And, you know, I've got all their numbers, all their spouses' phone numbers. You know, I consider them all friends. Yeah. And they all turned out great. Here's where I want to drill into your story, because I also know people that are raised in ministry families that, man, as soon as they get to college, and sometimes Christian college, substance abuse problems. You know, and it's like, well, where did that come from? And it's like, you know, nobody ever taught them that they were going to be adults, and it just blindsided them.
Yeah.
So let's start there. Did you have the foresight to look at your, you know, 2 and 6 and 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds as they were coming up, or, you know, just pick ages and say, okay, you're going to be an adult. You're going to be able to do whatever you want when you leave my home. And I need to help you step into that now, step into, you know, faith, step into actual just maturity, like, you know, things like knowing how to do your laundry. Were you guys thinking about that as your kids were growing up, or did you just adjust a lot?
I think, first of all, we want to let everybody know we had 3 daughters, so I know nothing about raising boys. Let's just preface that. So some of this may transfer just
and
fine,
they're
but
20,
I don't know.
25, 27, and 30, so
yes.
It was a while ago.
Yeah. Quite a few years ago. Yeah. But honestly, we actually did a lot of intentional parenting. I really had a passion for doing parenting and doing it the best I possibly could, and going into it, nobody knows anything, so I just wanted to keep learning from any source I could, and was involved in MOPS and went to
started MOPS.
Yes, here at our church.
She knew we needed it, so she started
MOPS is
it.
Mothers of Preschoolers,
right,
if you don't
right,
know.
Yeah, really good ministry.
Okay, so you just really, as you went along, found wisdom.
Yes.
Basically is the way to say this.
But I also thought of, and Tim did too, not so much because he's a live in the moment kind of person, have fun. But I also thought, okay, if we do this, are they going to turn around and do that and think this is going to be the norm? I that was always playing in my mind. It's just my personality anyway. But
in-game stuff. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for us too, we were struggling to do ministry in a context that we didn't really understand, and was hard. And I think there was an advantage to that, in that our kids were doing it at the same time, and we shielded them from as much as we could as far as the negative stuff that was going on in the church. But they were living, and I don't know if it would be the same today, but they were in the public school system. We couldn't afford private school. It didn't matter anyway. Homeschooling wasn't really on the table for us at that point. That wouldn't have been her gift mix.
Yeah.
And she was busy, you know, working at church with me. So I think we took them into the context of doing ministry with their friends and trying to reach their friends and trying to understand that all the way through. So I think there's a balance. If you start sheltering them too much, and they're always around their Christian friends, and that's the only people they ever know, and that's all they ever get, then when they go to college, then it's Amish Rumspringa time, and they're just like, wow, and there's the rest of the world out there. So we kind of let them experience that as they went.
Actually, I do want to turn a corner here real quick. So the book you wrote is about taking the gospel out to, first and foremost, your actual neighbors.
Right. Yeah.
I remember the line you used is, who is my neighbor? It's your neighbor.
It might be.
It's not that hard to interpret. Who lives next to you?
Right.
I know that there's certainly been, when I'm thinking about my own upbringing, there was like kind of this movement in the 80s and 90s of like, oh, well, non-Christian kids aren't safe for you, youth group kid. When in reality, I mean, if you get enough kids in a youth group, something bad's going to be going on somewhere anyway.
Two kids.
So the book is quite a bit about, the steps to getting out there and loving your neighbor and sharing the gospel with them. And your kids, as I have seen them as, high school kids and as adults, they are wonderfully mature examples of how to love somebody and that doesn't believe what you believe and hold tight to your faith and maintain friendships. Walk me through how that worked, because I just have seen a lot of people that did the non-Christians are scary, stay away from non-Christians, and maybe they quote unquote don't like falter, but they also don't ever share the gospel with anybody, which is like the reason we're alive.
Yeah. Well, honestly, this is my opinion, but I think good kids, just in general, gravitate towards good kids, if that's their real foundation. And even though their friends weren't Christians, they were good kids. They were decent kids. They didn't really have deep friendships with potheads or whatever.
No.
Goths, whatever you call them today, I don't know.
We wouldn't let them date them, or whatever. But yeah, no. I mean, some of their friends were Christians. It wasn't like there weren't any Christians around. They hung out with their church friends, and they had, Christian friends, really a lot of them in other churches along the way. But what she's saying is they were usually in an environment where there were other kids that had the same goals, whether it was a music program or, an educational program or whatever. They were in the same goals. I don't think, and I also want to say, there's no guarantee this is ever going to work out the way you want it to work out.
Yeah.
We feel very blessed that our children, turned out
Grace
the way that
God.
they did. God had Satan, and Satan didn't turn out well. So there's no specific thing you can answer. But we thought it was really important for them to be in the world while we were overseeing them. So then if there were bad things, we could confront them. We could, once the internet came along, we could figure out how to filter it in our home and put the computer. She had the computer right in the kitchen. We had a desk right in the, in the family room in the kitchen, so that we always knew what was going on. But at the same time, we wanted them to be around those other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would have those kids over
Yeah.
a lot. That was part of our parenting style, was to let these kids be in our home, be around.
Try to make our home the party home,
Yeah.
make our home the fun place.
Yeah. And, if I can just tell a little bit of a story on you here, because I would certainly say there are people in ministry that, that are getting the check from preaching on Sunday mornings and really don't hardly know anybody that isn't a believer. And I mean, I used to live right here, a couple miles away. I went to this church. I have met your actual neighbors that were non-attendees, maybe had some church background, that are now committed followers of Christ because you guys actually talked to them. So I got to think that probably them actually seeing you actually preach this stuff and then actually do it has got to be pretty beneficial.
Well,
I think
that's where our kids had an advantage, and to the parent out there who are in ministry, maybe listening to us, there's an advantage because they knew what we stood for. Another family that was friends with us, they knew who we were and what we stood for. I think it kind of gave our kids a step forward in the relationships.
Well, and because we both grew up in ministry homes, we really had a strong belief in realizing, because we'd seen good and bad turnouts of other families, that if you're a hypocrite at home, from what you say at church, kids will go running the other way. You have to have integrity in your life. You have to practice what you preach, literally. And if you don't do that,
And not hide stuff.
right. And we also really tried to stay involved with our neighbors. Whereas, like you said, some Christians want to stay in a bubble. Well, we went to every block party that we possibly could. We let the kids play outside. We were home. I was home for trick or treating, and we would.
We didn't boycott Halloween.
No, we didn't. And yeah, and we even had like neighbors over whenever we could. So we
But it was
tried
natural.
to, yeah. And when there was a baby in the block or the neighborhood, we ran to take a meal, and I made sure the girls were involved in that, whether they went to our church or not. And when we moved in, nobody in our neighborhood went to our church.
Yeah, that was key, making sure they were involved in that stuff too.
If I can just kind of give a little bit of a silly example, but something we've all seen as far as just practicing what you preach. Everybody's been at a restaurant where the parent yells at their kid to get off their phone, and the parent's doing it. And I mean, fortunately I'm married, because if I was single, I'd probably be like, hi.
Yeah.
I just wondered what the heck you're thinking. I'm just curious.
I know.
You know, fortunately, you get married and somebody stops you from doing those things.
We're all fortunate that you got married.
Let's dive in a little bit to, those transition years when you go from elementary school and your kids are pretty much just hanging off your leg because they think you were the coolest thing in the world, to we just know about human development, that, you hit junior high, specifically like, man, 6th to 7th grade, 7th to 8th grade, and then 14 to 16, those are drastically different life experiences for everybody, right?
Yes.
And so your kids start to pull away from you, and if you listen to this and you've got a 2-year-old, your 2-year-old's going to start to pull away from you at some point. Tell me about that experience, and what would you like to have known going into it?
Well, one thing that I had learned from somebody else was, and I really based a lot on.
Let me stop you right there. She was amazing at that, at learning something from somebody else. I'm more clueless. I'm just kind of like going for the feel of it. But she was always reading, bringing home ideas, talking about it. That's what the MOPS program was good for in the early years. So she was fantastic at
very
that.
inspirational. But I had learned that you have to have this foundation of love for your kids, that they just know they are unconditionally loved. But you have to be strict when they're young. And as they actually get in high school, you can actually really loosen up, because they understand what the rules are and that you love them. It wasn't for just the image or anything else. And high school was a blast.
It really was.
We loved high school. It was really sad to see that stage go. Junior high, not so much. You want to put them in a little box, but they're insecure, they're figuring out who they are.
You got the attitude thing going on, and you crack down when you have to, and let it fly when you were ready. But I mean, case in point, I bought. This is not a Dave Ramsey approved idea, but I bought them all a cheap junker car when they turned 16 or somewhere in there, because I wanted them to have their own vehicle, because I wanted them to be responsible for their own vehicle, and I wanted them to have the freedom. Honestly, I also was tired of driving them around everywhere. Let's just be honest. But if you don't allow some of that to happen along the way, then again, it's like, okay, well, you're off to college. Good luck with you. And they've not had any reason to have any responsibility.
Yeah. And, again, I don't want to be in the business of scaring people, right? But the over-sheltering thing, I think about my own friends who have gone through some rough stuff and come back to the Lord. And I've got a friend that, was raised by somebody that's kind of a big name in, a good number of people would know in Christian ministry. And man, as soon as he hit 18, he got kicked out of his Christian college at 19. By 21, he's waking up on Skid Row in LA with substance abuse problems, and and going to the homeless shelter for breakfast. And I mean, that's as literal of a prodigal story as I've ever heard, because he had to call somebody and say, I want to start over. I want Jesus. I don't want to be eaten out of the gutter. I mean, I'm literally eating out of garbage because of my substance issues.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we don't want to be in the business of scaring you, but like, hey, this, like, we can keep them 7 years old forever. It's just not going to go.
That's right. You've got, I mean, and you've got 18 years. I mean, that's all you've got. And again, let me say, but for the grace of God, there goes one of our girls. I mean, there's nothing you can do to keep yourself, keep your kids from going off and doing their own thing. I mean, I did a little of that myself, but I mean, you've got 18 years. You have to be proactive about it. It's not just, oh, well, it'll all work out, whatever. You got to be proactive and be, as she said, the word intentional with your parenting. And when stuff comes up, you got to confront it and you got to set the limits. I mean, we didn't let them date alone. I mean, this wasn't that long ago. We didn't let them date alone in a car until, or alone period, until they were 16.
Yeah.
And, we early on, we were like, we're going to do this. And when it got to that point, it didn't feel that weird because they knew it all the way through and they knew why. And they had boyfriends. They just knew, they couldn't be with him alone. And they're all married. 2 of them are moms. And, I'm happy we made that decision.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to point out one kid in particular, but I'm curious on the dating thing, right? Like, I know all 3 of your son-in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
I've known all 3 of them for years at this point. I mean, one a little shorter than the other because it's more, they're more recently married. But I love all 3 of those guys. And take me back to when maybe one of your daughters was younger and you're like, I don't think I like that one. Do you just stay quiet? Do you say, okay, if this multiplies out, and I know you're 14 and you like this boy, but if you stay together, in 20
I'm
years,
going to kill him.
Yeah. Well, I have to back that up because we didn't want to come across as that naive, live in the clouds parents, honestly. So we would approach subjects with them probably before anybody else did.
Yeah.
And so
maybe before they were comfortable with it.
Yeah, actually, yes. So I actually took them each away for a weekend when they were 10 and 13, and we went through, it's a little dated, I promise you, but we went through Dobson's Preparing for Adolescence, and we talked about, it goes through insecurity, and it talks about sex, and it talks about saving sex for your spouse. So 10, you do it at 10 because it's not long till they hear it from other kids at that age, sadly enough. And, they're with other boys or whatever. 13 because their hormones are raging and they really like them. Our intention was to do it again at 16, but it never happened. And they were too busy.
It wasn't important at that point.
We were thinking because that's when they started dating, but we'd laid this foundation way before they
all
started
dated
dating.
way before 16. They just couldn't
Had
be alone.
boyfriends,
Yeah.
and we had those boys over a lot.
So back to that, loser boyfriends.
Yes, I remember.
We'll remain politically neutral on it, but the beautiful thing about it, here's another thing I would say was really important for us. We started the first one out really well. When Rachel, as Rachel went, the other ones kind of followed. So there was some pretty tremendous peer pressure. If they sister pressure. Yeah, I guess I should say if somebody was dating somebody that they shouldn't be dating or wanted to go out or whatever, and some of it was hard for them. I mean, some of it was like, I really like this guy, but the values aren't there.
And I remember that with Rachel even.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, she did date this guy a little while, and we loved him.
Oh, he's a great guy.
Great kid. But we said, Rachel, you can't marry him. And because she had a commitment to Christ. So it wasn't like I'm laying my commitment on her. And she said, I know. And they didn't date steady, I would say. So then Lauren would not date a guy because he wasn't a Christian, and she actually ended up telling him, and not in a gentle way, I would say. And she probably didn't use the word Christian, maybe faith, but she did say it to him, and he said, what if I'm not as far as you think? Because he did have other Christian friends in his life. He ended up becoming a Christian. and he's her husband today.
Yeah. So was it really missionary dating? But it kind of really was. But,
Well, yeah, they didn't.
Yeah, they were
for a
friends,
while.
and he was kind of headed down that path.
None of them dated losers, but their sisters were always there, and we gave them freedom. I don't think either one of us ever said, I don't like that guy.
Yeah, because that can really turn against you.
Because if you tell me that, I'm going to do the opposite thing.
It
You
can
got a
push
little
your
bit of me
kids.
in me.
And I would have that kid around me all I could to influence that kid if they're dating him. Becca, we had one I wasn't as crazy about, and when they broke up, she was heartbroken. And I said, Becca, could you have married him? Or would you have married him? And she said, yeah, maybe. And that just was yikes, red flag. Thank you, God, for breaking them up. And that was the other thing. We prayed for their future spouses since the day they were born.
Yeah.
And for God just to continually put people in their path to help them love Jesus. So those are two things you can pray from day one.
Let's talk about how separating the pressures of the rest of your life from being, a parent and also being a spouse in some way. So I've been in a car with you before where I distinctly remember you get a call from somebody that, has recently made a commitment to Christ, who's coming out of a life of actual organized crime. And you're like, don't do that. Don't hang out with those people. You're going to wind up in jail. Jail bad, church good, go to small group. and then you get on the phone with somebody else and they're like, oh man, our nonprofit, which isn't in Shine.fm, listening area, is somewhere far away, so I can tell this story. But man, our nonprofit is tanking and this person's just losing their mind. What do we do? And you're like, okay, you're calming them down. You pop out of the car and you're preaching in 15 minutes and you're like, you didn't break a sweat. And those were two really intense conversations. And that's a microcosm of leading a struggling church for 8 years when your kids are young and having to figure out how to leave that at the office. So how did you guys both, as people who worked in the church, quote unquote, leave that at their respective office at times, particularly when you really needed to be zoned in on parenting? Because they get to high school a little more independent, right? But when they're little, man, they really want your attention when you get home. So how did you flip that switch? Because I've seen you flip the switch.
Yeah.
He has ADD.
Well, honestly, I can do that. I mean, I think that is part of my ADHD is I can flip the switch. I really loved my girls. I really loved my family, and that was always my priority. So I would have to be really, really messed up by something going on to let that affect what was going on when I came home. And that's not true of everybody else, but it was really important to me to be able to turn it off. And also I had her, to kind of make it all.
Well, we both grew up in ministry, so we had the kid perspective.
Yeah. So
we could remind each other.
It's not going to let those stupid people mess with our family. So, whatever the situation was, I had to switch it back off when I got home, period.
Gotcha. Just as, we're kind of getting towards the end of our conversation here. When you look at 0 to 18, right? What would you say are some of the really, really key things that you want to pass on to your own kids now that they've got kids, right? So we've, you got one with two with one. They're really
and
in
one
those,
on the way.
and one on the way. They're really in those early stages where, infant care is kind of the same for everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain things that always have to happen. Baby needs food. That's important. If you look at kind of the big transitions in life, which is preschool, going to school, elementary to junior high to high school to college. Is there 3 or 4 big moments in there where you say, absolutely make sure that you get this right? Like you talked about, going away at 10. Are there any other of those kind of signposts you would say, man, you really, really get that one done?
Well, for me, I learned it from How to Really Love Your Child by Dr. Ross Campbell, which he's not even living now, but it's one of the first books I have women read. And what it focuses on is making sure your kid's emotional tank is so full. because if their emotional tank is full, they really listen to you. And this is huge, and it just gives them a healthy self-being, self-esteem, and it involves positive eye contact, which starts when they're infants, and positive physical touch and focused attention, which never ends. And focused attention is a big deal. We used it as rewards on the sticker charts, and he made sure he got those lunches in on early release
so
days.
Sticker chart was like this thing that she had figured out. Like, you do your job, you get a sticker, and if you have enough stickers at the end of the week, you get a prize. Once a month, then that prize is to go do something. The grand prize. With Dad or whatever. And I would always make sure my day off, I had time with the kids and maybe a special date with the kids. But back to your age question, I think everything is so important in the early years. That's why we're so happy that our 2 daughters that have kids are actually able to not work outside the home very much and stay home and be able to raise them. Those preschool years where all the development's coming in, and then as they move on along the way, there are different stages, but I think that whole 0 through 5 is just so important, and psychologists will back that up. Yeah. That's a big deal. You're going to have every kid's going to go do different stages at different times. It's really just about the connection that you've made early on, I think.
And getting them involved in church. And if church wasn't good, if their youth group wasn't good, I learned this from my mom, then I would volunteer in there and help make sure it got good. Because otherwise you don't want them hating church. Growing up, they, especially at a young age, they equate church with God. It's really hard for them to separate that in their brains. So you want them to love going to church.
Yeah, and listen, we struggled like everybody else with the balance of outside activities in church, but there were very few times when we let something else get in the way of being involved in church. And if you're listening to this and your youth programs, your kids programs aren't very good, then fix it, or go somewhere else, for crying out loud, because this is the time when this is going to be the most important thing. Don't let them become a great soccer player and miss out on the spiritual development that they've got for the rest of their life.
And I actually think I want that to be our, if we can go out on this, we've done an entire show on overwhelmed families, with a psychologist. So, if you haven't grabbed that one, go back on iTunes and grab that one. But I do just want to bring up a story that I've used on the show before, and that's one of my closest friends. His son's 9. Son's a pretty good baseball player, and son also plays hockey, so it's big commitment. And his son got picked for the big traveling team. And my friend just said, I don't think we're going to do that. And another parent pulled him aside and said, this is child abuse. What about his future? And my friend said, brother, I'm a multimillionaire. And kid's going to be fine. We'll figure something out, right? I am seeing now, with some of my own friends, they're like, oh, well, this sport or this activity, it's like a second job. We're gone all weekend. And I'm like, but they're 6. Yeah. So don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
did they learn to use their imagination and play?
And when did they learn to make their own decisions for themselves? I just talked about that in the sermon series. No, that's not the important thing. They should be in some outside activities, but they need to be home. They need to be with Jesus. They need to be with Christian friends. I mean, don't take what we said at the beginning as go put your kids in traveling soccer and so that they can be on mission, because if they're only on mission and they've not got anything filling them up, then that doesn't work either.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're going to be completely fried out.
Right. Or gone.
The further resources I just want to point people to. So Denise, you've got a podcast. It's I would say it's pretty women focused. So if you're a guy
that women who are leaders in churches or pastors' wives, yes, or lay leaders even in churches. But yeah, DeniseHarlow.com or Wellmentum.net.
So if you like what's going on here, you want to check out a little more of that. The book Life on Mission, even though we didn't talk about sharing the gospel with your neighbors, we talked a lot more about your kids. I also do just want to kind of throw this out there and say, if you want your kids to be people who share Jesus with the world, do it yourself. And a lot of people think that the only way they can do that is to be Christian Mormons, where it's like they put on a white shirt and hand somebody something and awkwardly walk off in their house.
Yeah,
so, if I can just plug that a little bit, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
No, we never did it that way.
No. The opposite. I mean, we kind of had to be the opposite because we were pastors. So,
Okay, and then we're going to go out on this because we're going to run out of time. But just how did that, even though that's not parenting, that ties all this together, how did you share with your neighbors' kids, when they knew you were pastors? Because it's a little different, right? Because you're like, okay, when's the Amway pitch coming?
We loved on them.
We loved on them. We were salt and light, but you have to be a different level of salt and light depending on where you're at and who you're with and who you are. So I'd say we dialed it down a little bit. We dialed the light down. We dialed the salt down, and we just let them see your good deeds.
Verbally.
Let them see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Yeah. A little bit goes a long way. For us, that was the key. Wherever you're listening to me, that it may be you need to turn it up a little bit. But for us, it didn't take that much. We're supposed to be witnesses. That's what this is about, right? Not go witnessing. We're supposed to be witnesses. So what do they see in your life?
So this isn't 2 hours a week. It's not a program. It is who you are.
Go where you are. That's how they did it.
Man, this has been enlightening. Tim and Denise Harlow, Parkview Christian Church, 3 campuses in the south suburbs of Chicago. And just a plug on those references, one more time, Momentum.net for Denise's podcast, and Tim's book is called Life on Mission. Wherever you get books, you'll find it there.
That was Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Subscribe to the Shine.fm podcast to catch every episode of Stronger Together, available on the iTunes podcast app and wherever podcasts are available.